Emma Farley. Welcome to the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So to kick off, could you just introduce yourself a little bit, your disability, anything you want to share about your background?
I was born with muscular dystrophy, officially diagnosed at age 4. And I started using wheelchairs when I was around 12 or 13, sixth grade. And then in middle school, through neuropsych testing, I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyscalculia, which is like a form of dyslexia, but it has to do with numbers and sort of math. It's like a math dyslexia.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm also I'm studying disability studies at CUNY School of Professional Studies. So I'm almost done with that degree program. I'm soon to be launching my own podcast called Unsilent, Disability on Our Own Terms. So that should be the first few episodes should be released in the next week or so.
That's
Yeah,
so exciting. Yeah, I saw that. And I feel like a lot of our paths cross. You're living in New York currently, right? New York City?
I'm in Brooklyn. Yeah, so New York City area. Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in New York City for a couple years as well, quite a few years back. I was living in Jackson Heights, Queens. And when I was living there, I went through your program as well, the
Oh,
City
amazing.
University of New York program.
I mean, I started my school career at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, but it really, at that time, so I graduated high school in 2012. At that time, there really wasn't like online like programs. I chose UW Whitewater because it would had received some recognition for being disability inclusive, but it still wasn't really inclusive in the way I needed it to be. So I wasn't successful there. But when I moved to New York, um, I've always known that I wanted to um, uh, like devote my life to disability activism in some way, or just, I know that I've wanted to center my life around the disability community. And so it just moving to New York, everything kind of fell into place, and it's an asynchronous all online program, which I mean, I went from being like really struggling in school and not really getting grades, and now I'm a 4.0 student, which I never thought would happen. And which is great. I really like it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure having it be remote really helps too. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. When I did it, I believe it was still in person, but I think with the recent pandemic, and that helped with the transition process to making it remote.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and remote, I mean, like my sister, um, when I started the program, my sister was in grad school at NYU, but it looked a lot different for her when it was all online. Like she had to do like Zoom, like in classes and things like that. So she had to like go online at the same time as her other like as everyone else in her cohort. And it was like, and that was really hard for her, I think. But I like that I can really do things on my own time, which I like. Um, working full time and then also being in school is not easy. So it allows for the flexibility that I need for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow, that's incredible that you're balancing a full-time job and doing this program at the same time.
Yeah, I've been working full time since I started. I mean, now my full time job is really getting this podcast that I'm launching. I was working at companies before, but the reason I want to start a podcast really, I don't know. I didn't really office. I don't think the workforce is really inclusive. I've had a really hard time I'm able to get my foot in the door pretty easily. And I think that comes from, you know, I recognize my own privilege, and I think it, comes from that. And I also am really smart. Like it's not like I'm not qualified, but I have a hard time with the way that our work culture has been set up and really built. I don't think it's changed a lot. So I think it's hard. And I really, again, I've at my last job, which I, left, in January, at the end of January, I kind of was like, maybe this is like kind of my shot to like really do what I want to be doing. So I'm following through with it, and nervous, like, because it's, again, having a job at a company and a steady paycheck is like definitely very comforting. But um I feel like I'm willing to be uncomfortable for something that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you're definitely not alone when it comes to like feeling like the workforce isn't built for them. Not only like for people with disabilities, but also I just read a stat somewhere around 70 to 80% of people in general are not happy at their jobs.
Yeah.
And and then with people with disabilities, like obviously the work environment is not built for us. It's all these um, different types of accommodations, not that they're costly and not necessarily costly. Um, but I know there's that myth that's around. Can you go into the detail of why it's not for you? Because I think a lot of people with disabilities will really resonate with you in that they'll share the same challenges.
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like, like I said, the way that businesses across most industries are run, um, they've been operating the same way. That not much has changed. It changed, except no, now we have to let in other people besides, people that look like my dad, like white, cis, like non-disabled man, like, and but we haven't changed the work culture to fit around that diversity. There's like better technology, but I just don't think much else has changed. And it's specifically for me, it's, before COVID, it was getting to work in person every day. I mean, it really, to get ready in the morning, and it's not easy for me. And it looks different. Some days I like struggle to put pants on. Like, so that's a lot. I don't have as much energy to, and then commute, and um offices are not really that accessible. They're pretty uncomfortable. I do a lot of adapting around offices. You'd think that with remote work, the physical disability barriers would be eliminated because you're in your own space, but that's actually not true. I still, like, now there are a lot of companies are doing, they've created software that sort of spy on you, to make sure that you're being productive. And really the kind of value, the culture is that if you are not sitting and typing for 8 straight hours, companies view that as like you're stealing their time. And that's not really sustainable for humans in general, but it's certainly not, doesn't work for me either. I mean, doing tasks take me longer. So if I need to use the bathroom, that might take me longer. If I need to go get a snack, whatever. I also, with ADHD and stuff, and, my other disabilities, you know, I can't work for, I need to be able to do things. Well, really the overall is work. Not only I can do any of the jobs that I've worked for, I can do the tasks that I was hired for, but I cannot necessarily do them in the way that other people do them. And work is requiring me to not only do a task, which, yeah, you hired me to do a task, I'll do it, but they're telling me how to do it. And they're saying, you need to do it this way, and that's the only way. And that's a real problem because I can't necessarily do that. And for disabled people, again, you know, we might not be able to do things the way that our non-disabled colleagues can do things, and we need to be able to, that needs to be accommodated. And I've never had a job like, if you're like, let's say an emergency room doctor or nurse, like, yeah, do you need to be in the office? Yeah, it's like part of the like, job. You need to see your patients. Do you need to do things in a certain way? A lot of tasks, yes, like you can't necessarily perform a surgery, like, however, like they're very, um, you know, uh, but I have office jobs. I mean, come on, you know what I mean? It's like I don't need to do them the way that everybody else does them. I will meet your deadline. I will produce good work, but if I can't do it a different way, you know, um, and again, in general, there's this real resistance to, the attitude I usually get is that I'm like cheating somehow. Um, and I'm not. I'm trying to adapt. I'm adapting to an environment that is really not made for somebody like me to thrive in. Um, it's also just the attitude on disability. I think in a lot of um, environments, well, I know that I'm intelligent. I know that I'm qualified for the jobs that I've had, but I think that when I've been hired, um, I think the appeal of hiring me comes from, I think maybe my bosses have felt like they can tokenize me, and I am not somebody that allows that to happen. I don't tolerate ableism. I don't tolerate unfair treatment. I don't tolerate discrimination. And I don't, I'm very assertive, and that is unwelcome. I think a lot of, I think, and this even goes back to when I was a student in school, being assertive comes off as like being disrespectful, um, which it's not. And, and I also think the workplace, I think disabled people bring to the surface the incompetencies and the problems that are systematic. Other people might be able to go along to get along, where disabled people cannot. And for people that are in positions of leadership, that is a real threat. And I think that that's really where the problem lies. It's not in disabled people can work, can do lots of things. Like there's no reason why disability should be so absent from the workplace, or hidden. There's a reason. It's not because we are incapable. It's because we're really prevented from being successful. And I just don't think that the work culture is there. And I'm really sick of putting myself where other people have been building a career. I've been mostly building a collection of traumatic experiences, and I'm just not willing to put myself through it anymore. And I don't know, after my last job, I was kind of like, that's it. No, I'm going to like be an activist, and I'm going to like change things. That's part of my goal is, to really make changes that are long overdue.
Yeah, yeah, I love the conviction, and I really resonated with you when you said, you know, you can meet the deadlines and you can finish the task, but not necessarily in that rigid one way. So can you give an example of how that rigidity has affected you?
Yeah. So trying to think, because again, I don't want to like I legally I'm limited with what I can say about certain jobs because I have taken legal action and signed NDAs and stuff. But yeah, I'm trying to think of like different examples, but it really has to do with the way I broke up time. Um, Less of an issue when I was salary, but hourly jobs, that doesn't really work. They want you here from here to here, and if you're not working those 8 hours, like you're doing something wrong. Um, and then again, disabled people are often monitored more than their non-disabled colleagues because people are ready to accuse you of not being able to, I mean, the expectation that you are able to do the job is already low. You're monitored extra carefully. And if, and again, if a systematic issue is brought to the surface, it's individualized, as a you as a disability problem, and not really a business problem. And you're not able to, and I think also not, the accommodation process too makes it really hard. That is a really, and I don't even understand. I don't think like the whole reasonable accommodation. Well, what's unreasonable? I've never heard of anybody asking for something that's unreasonable. I don't know if I really believe in that term. I think all accommodations are pretty reasonable. I've never asked anybody like, I need you to pay me in diamonds or like, anything like that. Like I have asked for really reasonable things, but yeah, I think it's a control thing. I don't know. Yeah. It's different things. And then it's, again, just the attitudes people have towards disabled people, the ableism, unwillingness to really be called out for it either. Especially a boss, a manager, they see it as a threat or disrespect or, and again, I think they almost see it as you're pointing out there, like, I know, because, a subordinate is supposed to just kind of do it, but if you're assertive about your disability, it's seen as like, I think I've had a lot of bosses that kind of, I feel that they saw it as me challenging their authority when that's something they shouldn't have authority over. That's something that's for me to have authority over,
I think you're right. Time and how you do things and attitudinal barriers is still a big hurdle for people with disabilities. Um, Sometimes perhaps more of an obvious barrier for people with visible disabilities like us. Um, so the next question follows along the same line of just what you've been talking about. What do you think are the main challenges, just in general, not just in employment, that people with disabilities face on a day-to-day basis that other people don't have to worry about?
So everybody's experience, disability has such diversity and everybody has different barriers and experience, but I think it's less about like it's the overall issue that really needs to be addressed, I feel, is that I think really links the disability community together, is that oftentimes, we are robbed of our right to be able to take ownership over our own identity, whether that is, a doctor saying, this is what condition you have and this is what it's going to mean for your life. Maybe it's a nonprofit organization that's run by a non-disabled person who is, constructing the narrative about, specific conditions. It's parents, creating social media accounts that are about like educating about, and kind of exploiting their children. Or it's, look at the film industry or the, literature, who's writing those stories, it shows up in so many different ways, but non-disabled people have been allowed to place themselves in positions of authority over the disability community. And that affects the type of activism, the way it's shaped our activism. It has shaped the types of services and that are available, laws. It has shaped everything about our daily lives as disabled people. And I think that's really the greatest barrier, is that we are not allowed to be the captains of our own ship, and not that allyship isn't important, because it absolutely is, but you're not, like non-disabled people, you're not driving the car, or you shouldn't be allowed to. I really believe that. And I think that, I think the disability community, a lot of individuals have been really, I mean, over, and this is over generations, over long history, have been conditioned to accept that, when we shouldn't have to. And that comes from, you know, there's no, like, I haven't heard of a place to go that's better than, like, ableism exists in all corners of the planet, in every culture, in every society, in every um, community group. It's just there. And so there's a lot of conditioning that comes, from, where, no matter where you're from being raised in that kind of society. And I think that's a huge issue. I think also, I think really what is a big opportunity, though, is before this is a community that's been historically very isolated from one another. I mean, I was born in 1993, and my only access to the disability community was through the Muscular Dystrophy Association and going to those summer camps. I had some peers with disabilities in school, but that was limited. But it now, with this rapid, rise of technology. I mean, even in my own, social media became a thing while I was in my teen years, while I was a teenager. And now I look at, like, where it was when I was in high school or middle school and where it is now. So now the disability community has access to each other, not just, locally, but on a global scale, and that, I think, is key, is that we now have access to one another. We can now share ideas, share experiences, collaborate, and again, like, take back that ownership. I think also we are that's through that access to one another, we can take an intersectional approach to disability activism, which is so important because, like I was saying, I know my own barriers, I know what I've experienced, but and even though we're both wheelchair users, we haven't experienced disability in the exact same way, even though we have similar, you know, um, there are things that overlap, of course, but there is, diversity within just being wheelchair users. There's diversity in those experiences. And those experiences intersect with other, again, me being disabled and also a female, you know, that marginalization that I experience as a female and as a disabled person, they intersect. And how does that affect my experience? Intersectionality is really important. And access to one another means that we can approach activism with intersectionality.
Yeah, exactly. And both of our experiences, you're right. Like, even though we're both wheelchair users, our experiences are very different and our disabilities are very different. Mine is polio and scoliosis, and yours is muscular dystrophy. And, our day to day lived experience can vary a lot as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I know on top of the challenges in the work environment and attitudinal barriers in both our professional and personal lives, there's also like very real um, health and medical challenges we're confronted with as well, right? I know in when you were very young and still now, there were realities that you're confronted with. I was reading one of your articles that you did, someone interviewed you, and you were sharing that I was forced to accept these three realities, right? My muscles are getting weaker. My muscles will continue to get weaker. And I may only have a small window of time to change things before this disease takes away the opportunity forever. I'm not paraphrasing exactly, but just the gist. I
Yeah.
think you said I may only have a small window of time to do things. And this led you to make two promises to yourself, which I can really resonate with you on, because all three of those things, I myself have to face those realities as well. And and you're saying these two promises. You said, I'm going to do as much as I can for as long as I can. And the second one, I will never allow muscular dystrophy to hold me prisoner. I will find a way to do the things that are important to me. So my question to you is, how has this decision, changed the trajectory of your life since you made these two promises to yourself?
Well, I think, and like, I think a better, what I've definitely, and that was, I think I wrote that a few years ago. And I think really a better way of saying that, would have been, I am not going to let other people, or, really define how, what muscular dystrophy means for my life. I think really when I wrote that, what I meant, and I remember writing that, and I was a little bit emotional. And and it was COVID, and I was like in a lot of feelings. But I felt like, I feel like yeah, I have these, things are getting harder. I mean, I felt kind of like I wanted to get to New York from Wisconsin, like kind of I was running out of time. I felt like I was running out of time because I knew it was going to be a lot harder for me to do that move if I, you know, needed, you know, somebody to help me every single day. That was going to, so I wanted to do it while I had sort of without the additional barriers that are just going to keep increasing as time moves forward. Um, I think, um, I totally lost my train of thought. What was your
You
question
were
again?
saying that you were really emotional when you wrote that piece, and also there were some things you would change about it.
Yeah, it really, I think because muscular dystrophy, there are things about it that are inherently difficult. It's not easy to lose function. I mean, even like just as we're aging, like, it's not easy. I mean, I'm starting to see, I'm gonna be 31 in April, and I'm starting to see I mean, I have makeup on, but like a little bit of lines, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, change is not easy. And when our bodies are changing, that's not easy. But, with muscular dystrophy, that happens a lot quicker than it would be for other people my age. And there is a grieving process involved with that. But I do feel like, most of the barriers that I experience are not because of muscular dystrophy, but because of the inaccessibility of the world. And I think, you know, I definitely, but again, it's about, even with that grieving process, it's about, I'm not going to let change in the way my body's changing, in the way that it's just, there's nothing I can do about that, and even that's not a bad thing, it's just happening a little bit the same thing that other people go through. It's just happening quicker in my body. And, it doesn't mean that I have less value. It just means that I'm gonna do things differently. And, you know, it, again, I'm gonna do things like for as long as I can. You know, we don't know how much time we have to do things, I mean, I could, like, tomorrow morning, I could, I could get an accident, and that could be it for my life. You don't know. So it's important. I think really what I meant, and what I felt in my heart was like, just use the time that you have wisely. You don't know, because you don't know how much time you have, and don't waste time. Time means something different for me as somebody with muscular dystrophy. It feels like I don't have as much of it. And so I always feel a little bit rushed to do things. But I also know that, and again, this is why I want to start this podcast. And it's like, just do it. Like, what's the worst that can happen? Is it like you fail? Okay. But like, do you want like your life to go by and be like, I never did that? That's not the way I've ever lived my life. I think about, when I was little, I was always, disabled, but when I was walking, it's like, I was on a soccer team. I did dance classes. I did the things that were important to me as a kid. And was I ever the best at, like, no. But I I did the things that were important to me while I could do them. And I didn't allow, and I just, because I knew that I wasn't guaranteed the ability to do those things forever. And it's the luxury of, or I don't know if it's a luxury, it's a privilege of muscular dystrophy to kind of know what's coming a little bit. Um, so I knew how to use my time wisely, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very positive way to word it. It's a privilege of muscular dystrophy to know what's coming. In a way it is. And to realize that, if you turn down this time and to do to play soccer or whatever it was that you wanted to do, there might not always be that chance. And I think
Yeah.
that's the case for everybody, whether you have a disability or not, just due to the natural aging process. But for people with certain types of disabilities like us, that process is just that much more sped up, right?
Yeah. And I saw the barriers that were, I was gonna have to face ahead. And I just, I wanted to, I think that's what made processing, the loss of function a lot easier, is because, you know, it is like, again, I've, I know how muscular dystrophy affected my body. I knew from a very early age, like by elementary school, I knew I was going to be in a wheelchair at some point and I was going to need it full time. So it's like I had time to process that. And it almost felt like I look back and I didn't really notice that transition as it was it's sort of like aging, you look at a picture of yourself when you're like, 10 years old, and you're like, that happened and you remember going about your years, but it's still kind of like, oh wow, that happened, like I was that young. And or like, I even, yeah, it's but you don't notice it as much as it's happening. And I think that's another, but I knew that something was happening to my body. I knew what was happening, but um, and so I used my time wisely, but I didn't feel like something was like, I didn't feel like the rug was pulled out from under me. It was very slow. And I think that helped too, is that I've always had the luxury of being able to process, have that time to process as it's happening. Nothing was ever, like if somebody's in a car accident and loses their ability to walk, you don't have that time to process. It's just that something happened, and I had that luxury. And I think that helps too.
Yeah, the mystery of that slow process. As you were talking, I was thinking like, wow, you're right, that a slow pace really creeps up on you. And for you, it seems like you've used it to your advantage to prepare for whatever is coming in that next step.
Yes. I've
Um,
always had to prepare, which again is a luxury. And even like, yeah, I know that I won't be able to, you know, like right now, I mean, it would be a lot easier if I had help like every day, but I'm choosing not to because I like to do things on my own time. I'm not, I think that time is coming to a close. So I'm preparing for that. But I'm also like, again, I just want to hold on to that. I'm still young. Like I don't want somebody coming in here like in the morning and helping me right now. Like, and I have that time to process and grieve and prepare, you know.
mhm. Yeah. And and for people who are utilizing that help right now, it's not that that's like a negative thing, right? It's just something, it's just your own independence and your own preference at this moment in time.
Well, and it's also understand that's not like that's more of, again, that has more to do with the systematic barriers that are put in place. Like you're right, having help is not we are interdependent beings. We it as humans, like solitary confinement is like a cruel and unusual punishment because we are pack animals. Like we rely on each other. So none of us are like really independent, but and so it's not, but it's that control that, at least in the United States, that help don't get to choose, how many hours of help you get. You don't get to choose, there's a lot of barriers that, again, it's the way the system is set up. So it wouldn't be a big deal if the system were better and if the services met my needs, which I know that they don't. So that's what makes it bad. But it's not, needing help is not inherently bad. It's that when it's not provided to you in the way that you need it, that's what makes it bad. And there is a difference. And I'm glad you pointed that out. Thank you.
Yeah. And so I think it's wow, moving to NYC, New York City is huge. I know it can take, having lived in New York City for a couple of years, I grew up in the countryside, so I feel like the city gives you a lot, but it also takes away a lot in terms of energy. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so I primarily grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, and which is it's a city, but it's like it's a small city, and it's in the Midwest. So I've always grown up sort of around, I didn't grow up in I lived in a very small town when I was younger in Connecticut, but again, mostly I've lived in cities. It gives in the fact that, like, in New York, I like that when I'm going down the street, nobody's, I'm just I love being a human, that I'm not like something to stare at. I'm not like this, my sister kind of, I mean, I guess this is a gross way to put it. My sister, it's kind of perfect. My sister said this to me. She was like, yeah, once you've seen somebody on the subway platform, like, pee in front of you, like, wheelchair's not going to throw you off. And I was like, yeah, that's fair. Like, you see some stuff in New York, a wheelchair, a person with a disability, they're not going to throw you off. So again, people don't, I'm just, it's so, like, I just feel so normal. I know nobody's like, not a big deal. It's not throwing anybody off. I also like the flexibility. Like, again, it is a very inaccessible in a lot of ways. Like, again, I can't go on the subway. I mean, I don't want to. There's like only a small amount. And I think if I wanted to use the subway, I guess I just don't. It's mostly inaccessible, and that just is a pain. So but there's other options. The bus is accessible. Lifts and cabs, Lyft especially. I can get a car anytime, a wheelchair accessible car anytime, anywhere. And is that more expensive? Like, yeah, I have to find a way to fit that in my budget, but there's flexibility where a lot of places and stores and restaurants are not accessible. For every store or business that's not accessible to me, there's two more down the street that are. There's options where in Madison, Wisconsin, there wasn't another option. There was one cab company that had wheelchair accessible vehicles, and there was only like two on the road at the time, and so there wasn't another option. For when a store wasn't accessible, there wasn't one down the street that, it was just limited. In New York, there is options. And it's kind of like just every kind of person that exists on the planet exists in New York, every experience. You'll find your people here. And if you don't, it's the best place to be alone because you're never really alone.
No, you're never alone in New York City, but there's that component of always being able to be anonymous, like you were saying, and that people won't gawk at you because there is so much weirdness and diversity and strangeness in the city that, like, someone in a wheelchair or whatever is like really not strange at all.
Yeah. And even like when I'm helped, like in Wisconsin, somebody to hold the door for me and they'd be like, having it, like, kind of like it was like they made it weird. It was condescending. But in New York, it's like somebody holds the door, walks away. It's not a thing. It's just, okay. Like, it's because people, like, the city moves so fast. Like, I don't have time to be condescending. Like, nobody has time for that. We're all like trying to move, like, get to where we're going. Like, so I like that too, is like, I mean, or even, yeah, it's not a thing. People help, but they know the boundaries. and they know not to make it weird. And I love that about New York. Like, again, I was getting, just before I moved here and when I was in Wisconsin, I was like, I couldn't stand it. I was like, I think a month before I moved to New York, I was, waiting at a crosswalk on my way back to my apartment, and like have my headphones in, like I'm just at the crosswalk waiting to cross like everybody else. There nothing about me said that I needed help. And some lady came up to me, she's like, tapped me on the shoulder, and already that, me having to take off my headphones, what? Like I'm like, what do you want? Like, and do you need help? I'm like, how did that like get in your head that I need help? I like, no, it's so odd. I was so sick of that happened so many times, or just I felt so infantilized. I love Wisconsin. I love Madison. I don't want to like say it's not it's just, it is behind, and it is diverse. It's actually a very diverse city, but it is behind in the sense that I think it's very like, although it's a very like liberal city, under the surface it's very conservative still. And I think also, you know very surface level. Nobody wants to talk about the hard stuff, and that was really frustrating in New York. Like, people are real. I love that.
Yeah. And I think I know what you mean to a degree about um, asking you if you need help because of their assumptions about your disability, versus just asking for help. I think sometimes for able-bodied, to their credit, there is a fine line to juggle, and that's where the education component, which I've not always appreciated, um, is that as the minority, we're always going to be the ones that need to educate a little bit more and and be that much more patient.
Yeah, and I think it comes, and again, that goes back to like, again, what I find to be the biggest barrier is, who are people looking at for education? I mean, I even think, when I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, now I'm so lucky and grateful for my parents. My parents, you know, really could have gone the other way. They could have been really ableist. They are like both like, they grew up, they were born in the 60s, like so pre-ADA. They both are, like if you picture like privileged people in your mind, like that's what you are envisioning in your head. Yeah, that's probably what my parents look like, like, and what and so it could have gone the other way, but they were really wonderful that they just kind of got the big ideas when it comes to ableism. So, but I feel like, one of the biggest barriers again is, I know that when I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy, I know they were directed to find out what that means. They were directed towards doctors. They were directed to get information from MDA. They were never directed to ask people with muscular dystrophy or to get information from. I know that. And again, they're very intelligent, my parents, and they just figured it. I don't know how, but they figured it out. That to let me determine what that means for my life. Um, but yeah, who are we looking to when it comes to education? A lot of people, non-disabled people, are looking to other non-disabled people for information. So of course they're going to get things wrong. Look at who's doing all the trainings, or who's like, nobody's ever looking at the activists. Nobody's ever asking. So of course the information is going to be wrong,
Yeah.
but it's sort of, if I want to get information about, you know, what it's like, if I, I'm straight, I'm a straight heterosexual person. Like if I wanted to educate myself, when I educate myself about, somebody's experience who is gay, like I'm going to ask somebody who's part of that community. Like, it's like, but for some reason with disability, it's like the opposite. Like with other marginalized communities, it's usually you're going to go to people within that community, but with disabled people, it seems to be like, that's where that, again, that authority is not given to us. And that's a huge issue. And that goes right down to education.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think being more um, inclusive in that process and having us on the table and having those conversations in all facets of um, life and all in all those sectors is so important. And so I do have a relatively hard stop just because I have another call. And but I wanted listeners to be able to follow your good work and your podcast that you're about to launch. So tell them where they're able to follow you once that launches and where they're able to follow you on social media.
Yeah, so I'm active on LinkedIn, so you can always get in touch with me there. Right now, the podcast is Unsilent Disability on Our Terms. That's set to be released, within the next week or so, the first episode, and that will be available on all major streaming platforms. I am also look for the video version to be released on YouTube as well, and that'll be with under the channel Unsilent the podcast. Unsilent the podcast is what I'm going to be using for all social media. So if you're searching it, search Unsilent the podcast, and you'll probably
Yeah.
find it.
That's so exciting, and that's so awesome that you've taken the plunge to do that. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and I really appreciated the conversation with you. And yeah, feel free to stay in touch and ask me any questions as you launch the podcast.
Yeah, and I'd
Um,
love to be on as a guest as well. So we'll definitely, yeah.
Sounds good. Keep in touch. Have a good evening, Emma.
You too. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, bye bye.